Hey friends, it's John. You're on the JRB Tree Climbing channel. This video is about tree selection and tree crotch selection, particularly for a rope climber. Now, as I start off, be aware that on my website, jrbtreeclimbing.com, I've got a dedicated page for this, and I also have a dedicated playlist. This video really should be, and I'll make it, the first video on that playlist at the current time. But I reserve the right to reorganize things in the future. The reason I didn't make this video first was simply because I wanted to wait until the leaves were down so we can get a better look at the canopy. Now, if you're new to the channel, you might not be aware that my number one rule about safety is that we always have a rope in the tree. It's the first thing in the tree and the last thing out of the tree, even if you're not a rope climber. There's a few ways to get a rope in a tree. The best way is to use an arborist throwball. I carry mine around in a little bag. I don't even usually carry one when I'm climbing. See my video on throwball basics and paracord presets. But that's my preferred way to get a rope in a tree. If that's not possible, I'll use a pole. This is my Maverick pole. See the page on this. It's available at Ape Canyon Outfitters. You could build a DIY pole. And the last option is to manually advance your anchor. And I'm not a fan of advancing your anchor as you climb. I prefer to alternate anchors because technically, if you're advancing the anchor, well, it's not anchored in that instant and accidents can happen at any time. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take a walk through a local forest here near home. It's very flat. I want to give you an idea of some of the types of trees that I hunt on. Now, we've got a lot more in common than our forests do. The trees you see in my woods, well, they might not exist in your woods, but I still think you might have something to learn in the process. This particular patch doesn't have any pines in it, so I'm going to put in a short clip at the end on some big pine trees in my neighbor's yard just to give you an idea of what we might be looking at with pine trees, which are generally a different beast altogether. But I pulled up next to this maple tree, this hard maple, which is very predominant in my local forests. I'm going to give you a look up into its canopy and a bunch of neighboring trees. Now, the first consideration with any tree that you choose is that the tree has to be alive. Now, when you're choosing a tree in the dark, there's an awful lot of risks that you're taking on. In winter like now, when the leaves are down, you can't actually see out into the canopy to ensure that a tree is alive before you start climbing it. And so I urge you, wherever possible, to do your tree selection in advance. If you're a rope climber, leave a piece of paracord in the tree. We don't like to use a throw ball on a hunt, but if we need to and you're practiced at it, it's really no problem as long as you've got light to see. I am self-filming today. I'm going to give myself a time box. We're going to take a half-hour walk in the woods and we're going to pause and look at some trees. Okay, let's get a look at this maple tree. I chose it for a reason. It's pretty ideal in the sense that the diameter is just a little bigger than a basketball. It's very straight, and it doesn't have any branches to obstruct our climb. We get up to a certain height, we start to see a couple of crotches, and both of, as I come into view there, the one on the left, well, that's a little bit of a tight throw if I step to my right, but doable. It's about 4 inches in diameter. And that one shooting off to the right there, well, that's probably only 2 inches, and I don't think we could trust that. Now, in terms of the thickness of a crotch that we're going to use for rope climbing, my general rule of thumb is that at a minimum, the diameter of my wrists, let's say 3.5 inches or so, that's a good diameter, minimum diameter for a hardwood like an oak. For a softwood like a willow or a pine or whatever you've got in your woods, I've got Tulip Poplers here, well, I kind of go with more my upper arm. That's just roughly as you're eyeballing that tree crotch. And we want to make sure we get our line in the crotch, in the collar formed between the trunk and the branch. We always want to make sure we have our rope in there. The further out we go, well, then the principles of mechanical advantage, of leverage, start to work against us, and we would need something much stronger. Now, if I move over just a couple of feet to the next maple, well, that one's probably about 8 inches at the base, and that's plenty strong to climb. It's got some small branches on the way up. But if we're a rope climber and we're looking for a crotch, well, there's the first crotch. It's not a bad height, but it's only maybe 1.5 inches wide. We can't trust our life on that. If we go higher, that phenomena there is what we call co-dominant trunk. It's pretty much 50% of the tree's life goes left and 50% goes right. You never know what you're going to find in a crotch like that. There can often be some junk in there. But I could hit that with my throw ball and see if I could get a rope through it. I'm pretty confident I could. It might be necessary to remove the friction hitch, but that would bring this tree into play. Now here's a tree. I just bumped a couple deer as I was approaching it. Always wanted to do an observation sit here and see what walks by. But it's a locust and it's got these incredible thorns on it. It would be no fun to try to get a rope up, passed up as we climb in this tree. Another characteristic of locust trees is that they tend to have crotches which are really tight angles and therefore would prohibit passage of a rope, definitely one with friction hitches. But if I look up in this tree far enough, I think I found one that's doable. There we go. There's a crotch which is fairly open, and if I could get a throw ball in that, I could probably climb this tree. But definitely not my first choice if there was something better. So check this out. Talk about the rule of thumb. Well, that's something we can use when we're talking about tree and crotch selection in particular. So if I just hold my hand in a comfortable position, you see the angle formed by my thumb? Well, it's about a 60-degree angle, and that is a great shape for a tree crotch that we want to put a throw ball in a rope climb. And we want our rope to sit right here in the collar formed by the tree. We never want it out on a limb. Now, if I pinch my thumb closer, it forms a very tight angle. And that kind of angle, that's a problem. Locust trees, depending on the trees in your area, you might find trees with that kind of a formation. Or, for example, if I hold my hands in the peace sign, well, that's a little narrow. I might not get my rope through a tree with that tight of an angle. We're looking for something of this U shape. And if I stretch my thumb all the way horizontal, that's dangerous, right? We don't want to ever climb using a horizontal branch because we'll start climbing vertically, but as we approach it, our rope is at an angle and we might pull ourselves literally out on a limb. Never want to be out on a limb. That would be a scenario, and I've got a video on it in the SRT playlist where we would want to capture the trunk. The crotch is strong enough, but we capture the trunk and we'll simply be facing a different position. Okay, now this is a good example why we don't pick out trees in the dark. We might find this gem and say, hey, that's about a perfect tree. It's really straight. It's a great thickness. It looks okay, but this tree's dead. And you'd have to look an awful long way up into the canopy before you found the fact that it doesn't even have anything on the top. This thing is ready to go. This is what we call a widowmaker. We don't want to climb it, and we don't want to be anywhere near it. See my video called Widowmaker Causes Relocation. There's a lot of these. This is an ash tree. The ash trees are dying due to the emerald ash borer, but that's just a moment in time. Anyone could be near a dead or dying tree or branch, and it's our responsibility to be safe. These trees are most likely to come down in a storm, and so remember, storms test trees. The last time you'd want to be in a tree is during a significant storm. Little breeze, no problem. But a real storm can be a big problem. Now here's an interesting formation. We've got a really straight maple on the right and a dead and fallen branch in front of it. And behind it on the left, that dark tree is leaning. But it's got a really thick crotch right there. That'd be so easy to hit with a throw ball, but it would leave us in a leaning position. And I've got no problem climbing leaners, but we want to be comfortable. So if this conglomeration was in the right spot and I wanted to hunt here, I'm most likely to stick or more likely hitch climb that straight maple on the right and get myself up to a good height. If I want to return to that tree, I would leave a floating anchor. I've stopped and looked at this maple tree multiple times wanting to hunt it, and I eventually will. It's got a branch there 10 feet off the ground. But if we go up around almost 20 feet, I've got a great horizontal branch, which would be fantastic for a platform substitute. I love climbing trees that don't require me to bring a platform with me. Okay, but where would I rig my rope? So if I look up a little further, I've got an awful set of crotches up there to choose from, but I've also got this grapevine, and that grapevine is going right through the crotch that is of the most interest. And so if you can see that with the lighting, the problem with this tree, I can get a throw ball there, but the problem is going to be that my rope is likely to get caught. And so I would definitely have to take off my friction hitch and recognize that the rope might not make it through there. And if I had permission, and I do, well, I might remove that grapevine. It's not really helping the tree, and it's definitely not helping my hunt. So I happened on a buck scrape with a licking branch right over it. This is a great spot to hunt. And look, wow, that's only 20, maybe 20 yards away. I've got a nice straight tree. But again, if you found that in the dark, you might not have enough light to look up and realize this tree is dead and just waiting to come down. Let's find a better tree. Just about 10 yards away, I've got another maple. It's got branches on the way up. Now those branches are going to be full of leaves obviously during the season, and they're going to give me some natural camouflage. But let's see if there's anything to rig into. Well, that is too low and too tight. That's only about 15 feet off the ground. But I've got up a little higher. I've got crotches. In fact, right there is a double crotch, and I could hit that throw ball right from here. It could go over both of those crotches, give me an extremely secure anchor, and I could climb the right side of that tree. Remember, the first time we climb a tree, if there's a lot of branches between our lines, we can always climb it using a Basil Anchor SRT system the first time, and then rig our paracord preset, and in future climbs, we could use DSRT. It's just one of the many reasons I like the flexibility of carrying more rope and a universal system. Also, remember the lesson about Basil Anchor SRT systems. Even if we're planning on climbing the tree with DSRT, if the first time climb we've got branches between our lines and our first climb is going to be a Basil Anchor SRT climb, well, the crotch has got to be strong enough for it. And a Basil Anchor SRT system doubles the load on the crotch. If that concept is unfamiliar to you, please see my video and the SRT page. In my woods, we've got some giants. That's a Tulip Popler, and it's easily 3 feet thick at the base. A lot of bulk is going to give you some natural silhouette camouflage. But what do I got for crotches? Well, that is easily probably 40 feet, maybe 38 feet off the ground. Now, Tulip Poplar is a softwood. We never want to climb using a small crotch, but that's 8 inches thick. I could get a throw ball through that first or second try, but I need enough rope. Now, I wouldn't climb that high. I would only climb as high as I want to. But assessing the situation, it's straddled by a little maple on the left. That would give me some natural camouflage. I could get in this tree and be 20 feet off the ground and also policing that scrape. Okay, leaning trees. The forest is full of them. This is a hickory. It might be a bitternut, but it's leaning at probably, I don't have my protractor on me, but at a 15-degree angle. What I'm looking for is a spot on the trunk where it straightens out, and I really don't have one. There's a good strong crotch up there at about 35 feet, but if I climbed that tree, I would need to pull myself in, and it wouldn't be the most comfortable sit. Yes, I could do it if the tree was in the right spot, but we'd like something a little bit straighter. Remember, our comfort is very important. We want to be able to sit still, and that's not possible if we're not comfortable. The tree behind it, well, it starts out straight. This looks like an elm, and for the first 20 feet, it's fairly straight. And so the first available crotch, though, isn't available until probably 30 feet. So I think the way I'd climb this tree is either with a hitch climb. Definitely on a hunt, I would just go up with a hitch climbing system. But if I wanted to set it up for a floating anchor, there's an option to go ahead and use a throw ball up into that crotch, rope climb up to there, and then one of the rare uses for a lineman's belt, throw your lineman's belt around the tree as you rappel down and choose the spot at which you want to set a floating anchor. Here's a great big sycamore. They're pretty predominant in the lowlands here in Pennsylvania, and that crotch is probably 28 feet tall. It's leaning a bit. It's in a good location, but on the tree, even here in the wintertime, we've got to recognize the hazards. So this is poison ivy. If you don't got it in your area, you don't want it in your area. Poison ivy, you can pick it out any time of the year. The characteristic of poison ivy is got that brown, hairy grasp on the tree, and obviously it's got the the classic three-leaf structure, but you can get poison ivy any time of the year. And so I advise you to, if you want to climb this tree, what I would do is, got permission to do so, I'd chop that off, and it'll be dead next year and likely keep us out of trouble. You can still get the poison ivy, but I'm not as susceptible without touching the leaves. That's a 20-inch Tulip Poplar, straight as an arrow. And this is just one of those, it's a great location. It's a straight tree. We'd love to climb it, but if we didn't have enough rope, well, we couldn't grab that just easy as pie crotch. And it's only, I don't know, probably 30 feet. But I love to climb SRT, and this would be an easy tree to set up and get in. What a great tree to get in. It's got a branch just 15 feet off the ground we could use for positioning. It's got plenty of crotches. That branch is more like 22 feet off the ground. It'd be a little high, but plenty of crotches to get into. The problem with this tree, we wouldn't necessarily notice it in the dark. Well, look what's right next to it. This behemoth is dead. And you don't often see trees this crispy. I mean, this thing is ready to come down at any time. I can't even tell you what species it is because there's no bark on it. Beware your surroundings. There's a big old healthy buck scrape that I failed to find during my scouting missions in these woods. And look, right next to it, well, here's a beech tree. Beech trees are notorious for keeping their leaves on and giving you protection. Now there's a branch. That branch is dead. It's only about 15 feet off the ground, but it would serve as a positioning device, as would that little guy above it. But what do we got for crotches here? I've got a co-dominant. That would be trouble. We'd never want to try to get a rope through there. But what else do I have on this tree? Go up a little further on the other side. I've got some healthy crotches up there. And because this tree's leaning, well, I could get a rope there and actually sit fairly comfortably on the back side of the tree. I might be out a little bit, but it's worth a try. If I go next door, well, there's a Tulip Poplar. Again, it's a softwood. That branch on the right, I don't know. It's about 3 inches, which would be a little small for my criteria for a softwood. Probably fine, but let's not take chances. Now here's a medium-sized beech tree, probably just 8-10 inches wide. Beeches, if they can get to the light, they're going to have a lot of lower branches, but that'll provide camouflage. Now how would we climb that? Now, I'd like to protect this tree. I wouldn't want any marks in it from a platform. So I'd probably get a throw ball right up there through that high crotch. It's only 26 feet off the ground. And I'd give it a try. It happens to be right by another scrape and the licking branches on the tree itself. Here's another good looking scrape. Now if we weren't real careful and we were just trying to choose the closest tree, well gosh, how's this thing still standing? There's nothing left of that. I think I could push it over. And when I look around, my choices aren't that great. That's a giant sycamore, but the lean I mean, it's a giant tree, it's covered in poison ivy, and it leans too much, so that's not going to work. Next to it, there's a cherry tree. Now I could get in that smaller cherry tree right there. It's not ideal. Well, what else do I have? I don't have a lot. This is just covered in vines. And so sometimes, you know, again, if I wanted to hunt this scrape, which we're looking over right now, you just can't find quite the perfect tree, and you don't want to force the issue. I think the most likely scenario here is I would just keep traveling, go a little left, go a little right. This is on a straight line. Let's find the next scrape and let's hunt somewhere between them. Now here's a leaner, and you might just walk right past it, but you've seen this tree before. I actually chose this tree and did a video on it. Of course, there's no way I could climb or be comfortable on that. But if you go up a little bit, well, it's this tree, which bent over in a storm and basically lost its top, it sprouted an upright stem, and I've got a piece of paracord over that, and I've hunted this tree 3 times this year. Twice I pushed the deer out as I was coming in, and the 3rd time I saw nothing. But that's hunting. The point is, this is a viable tree, and I'm pretty comfortable up there. I'll leave a link to when I set up this tree in the video description for this video. And right next to it, I named that tree Big Sick probably 10 years ago because I did have a paracord preset in it, and I did hunt out of it, but it's just so large that the visibility wasn't great. I didn't have a platform that would work. I might try it again next year, but that crotch there is probably 40 feet off the ground, and they're definitely coming through here. You've seen this tree before. That's a sycamore tree, and behind it an elm tree, and my throw line is in the elm tree, and I've gotten a number of tags and two nice buck out of this tree over the years, but this was the tree that caused me relocation due to the proximity of widowmakers like the one immediately to its left. Another dead ash tree, and it's just waiting to take me out. Now this is a pretty important tree. You haven't seen it yet. Well, actually you did briefly in the tree selection video for the Widowmaker Causes Relocation. This is a very straight hickory tree, and I did hunt out of it. I hunted out of it because I figured out there's a scrape really close to it, and in fact right where I'm standing, a nice buck came out, a little 8-point came out I should say, and I look forward to hunting this tree next year. Now there's really no branches here, and so what I did is I rigged up a floating anchor. I have no idea if I'll be able to catch it on the zoom, but I've got a floating anchor in that tree to the right, and I'll be climbing that for you sometime soon. This was the only tree this entire season which forced me into a floating anchor situation. Your woods may be different. So here we are next to a stream with pretty steep banks, and surveying this years ago I found a good crossing here. So if you can see any of this, there's some fresh tracks there. They go up this hill, and I know we're fighting the sun, but I'm going to walk about 20 yards and I'm going to show you this massive specimen. This massive tree is a Tulip Popler, and it's got a piece of paracord in it. And I hunted it for the first time this year. It's kind of became dislodged. This is a massive tree. I don't want you to be scared of big trees. Big trees are easier to hide in. It's just that we might need to leave our tie-in kind of high and give us better maneuverability. Now, if I decide I'm uncomfortable in this tree, if you don't got the right platform for it, well, looking next door here, that's a pretty nice hickory tree, and it's got a branch at a great height. Of course, everything looks great in the wintertime because we can see, but in the summer the shooting lanes simply weren't as good, and that's why I went with the big sycamore. Okay, now remember, we've got a lot more in common than our forests do. I realize that a lot of you have predominantly pine forests, like the loblollies of the southeast and the long leaf pines of the south. Here in Pennsylvania, we've got a fair number of white pines. So here in my neighbor's backyard, that's my shed, and just across the line are a trio of over 100-foot tall white pines. But if we zoom in on those, the characteristic feature of some of these pines are these branches, and you got to make sure you choose a live one. But I'll go up into the canopy, and you see these branches which are largely horizontal, and we've got to be careful about trying to rig into a horizontal branch. We'd want to capture the trunk, because we don't want to be in a situation where as we approach the crotch we're pulling away and could wind up with our rope popping out and go out on the limb. If you're climbing a horizontal branch, you want to capture the trunk. And the other thing with pines in general is just to be wary of sap. If we get sap on our climbing rope, it's not going to make us a happy camper. In general, I try to avoid the pines unless I need to, and they are an application where I would consider stick climbing and dedicating a rope using an alternating anchor technique. Just trying to make sure I don't get any sap on my normal climbing rope. Okay, this is going to be my last tree. I've always wanted to hunt in this tree because it's in a great location, but it's leaning a bit. It's a big old elm tree. And as soon as we get to a height we want to hunt at, well, it branches off in all directions in that characteristic vase shape of an elm. But now that I've got some more tools in my toolbox, well, what I would do to climb this tree is I would simply put a throw ball through that first giant crotch. I'd climb to there, I'd get out my pole, and I'd put it on the right stem there. I'd put it right there, and my body would be right there in the center of your field of view. We've got options. And so with all the tools in our toolbox, between the throw ball and the Maverick pole and hitch climbing, we can get into virtually any tree. I just want to make sure I've got a location in it which is fairly straight so I can be comfortable. Okay, hopefully that helped you. Again, I had a little time box. I wanted to get this in. We hit some important topics, and of course, maybe less than 50% of the actual scenarios I might get into. And so we'll do some more of this content in the future, but I wanted you to have a basic in terms of what I look for in terms of tree selection. And that selection has gotten a little bit wider with the different tools in our toolbox. Let me give you a peek at those deer that were watching me earlier today. Thank you very much. Hi, pretty girl. I was just looking at the trees. I'll catch you later, okay?